Welcome to the Dispatch Podcast. I'm Sarah Isgur, and look, there's Mike Warren and Jonah Goldberg. Let's start with Biden's new immigration policy. In 2021, we were told that the border was secure. In 2022, the border secure. 2023, the border is still secure. And then 2024, an election year. The border is not secure. Shut down the border with hours' notice. Jonah, obviously, this comes on the heels of Congress failing to pass any border security measure. I have several thoughts and questions on this. Can you come up with a non-cynical way for this policy to exist?
Oh, gosh, that's hard. I think if you gave me a couple hours, I could come up, I could get out the legal pads and the slide rules, and I could come up with a non-cynical explanation. But Occam's razor says Joe Biden needs to say he's done something about the border before this debate. And that's got to be 80% of the explanation.
Because in terms of the crisis itself, the numbers actually have been going down. So peak crisis-wise,
Right.
He would have done this 6 months ago. Of course, he was saying he didn't have the authority to do this, which is why Congress needed to act, which we've seen over and over again. Barack Obama said that about DACA, the Dreamers, and then Congress didn't do exactly what they wanted on that, so he did executive action. We saw Donald Trump do it on several issues, one of which was bump stocks. Congress in both houses was debating a ban on bump stocks. That was seen as politically unpalatable for Republicans to take that vote, so Donald Trump did it through executive action. Joe Biden, over and over again, on student loan debt forgiveness, said he didn't have the power to do it. Then he did it. Then the Supreme Court stopped it. The rent moratorium is a good example. I'd forgotten about that one. And now the border, I think it will meet the same fate. There's going to be a lawsuit, and it will be found that Joe Biden does not have the authority to change asylum law unilaterally without congressional approval. I mean, this law says that someone cannot seek asylum, and caveats and exceptions and all of that, but cannot seek asylum if they've entered the country illegally. That's simply not what the law says, even though Section 215 of the INA, the Immigration Naturalization Act, does give the president broad power. It's, has again and again been found to be, broad but specific, not broad meaning blanket.
But that cuts both ways, right? If it turns out that the courts validate Joe Biden, that he was right all along about he didn't have the authority, that makes the Republicans who said for the last 3 years Biden can do this on his own wrong
Correct.
too, right? And
it helps Joe Biden because he gets, for the people who aren't paying much attention, he gets credit for shutting down the border, and then he gets to blame the courts. The same thing that he's gotten to do on student loan debt forgiveness, on rent stuff, on, Obama with DACA, Trump with the bump stocks. They all get the political credit. Congress, for some reason, takes no heat. And then when the courts strike it down, everyone blames the courts. Drives me insane, as you'll know.
right, so we should get Warren in here and just.
Oh, Mike, I didn't know you were there.
Hi.
If you want to be noticed, you shouldn't dress like a potted palm. Anyway, you hear the punditry on this is that this won't fix the border issue for Biden, as if he has to fix the whole of the border issue rather than just because, like, the people who think the border is their number one issue and that Biden sucks and that Trump is a god for closing the border and all that kind of stuff, they're voting for Trump no matter what. There's nothing Biden could do to convince them. It's those, low propensity, less engaged people who know that the border is a problem and they haven't paid much attention. Then they hear Biden tried to close the border and he got stymied by the courts, and like that it checks a box for him. And that might work. The mitigation thing might work, but it's still going to be a bad issue for Biden overall.
Mike, thoughts, feelings?
I agree with Jonah. This is something he kind of needs to fight to a draw, right? A draw is sort of the best outcome that Biden can hope for. Biden's biggest political issues with his reelection have to do with things that he cannot control at this point. I would say that he could have made some different political decisions a couple of years ago that might have had some effect on the economy. Maybe a Democrat, a liberal Democrat like Joe Biden wouldn't have taken them, but he could have done something to fight inflation better than what he did. Now it's too late. It's too late to affect interest rates. It's too late to affect inflation before the election. So he can't deal with that biggest policy problem that is nagging him and is causing him to struggle in the general election polls. The other issue is his age. He can't do anything about that. He can't, there's no, as far as I know, there's no technology like what Martin Scorsese used to de-age presidential candidates. So he can't do anything about that. So he's in a political situation where he needs to be seen as doing something. What he's doing is Biden is taking away an argument in that debate later this month and in the final weeks and months of the campaign. Republicans may still make the argument he didn't do anything on the border, but he's trying to blunt that argument, bring it all to a draw. And I agree that it probably will work. I don't think it's going to solve his bigger political problem and deliver the election.
I think Republicans have an interesting political dilemma because what I'm seeing right now is the messaging that this isn't enough, that there's exceptions, that it's not a real solution to the border. Instead of this is cynical and it's going to get stopped by the courts. He knows this isn't ever going to take effect, for instance. They have like a few avenues here. I mean, Mike, you think this will be somewhat effective for Biden. Will it be effective for Republicans?
If Donald Trump wants to take the issue on and make it an issue in his campaign, I don't see any evidence he really wants to, which is ironic because this is the issue: immigration, a porous border, et cetera, that put him on the map in 2016. I don't get the sense that this is a priority for him politically at the moment. He mentions it. I'm not saying he doesn't mention the border and crime from illegal aliens and Biden's not doing enough. But he continues to be so focused on the other stuff.
Himself.
Exactly. So I do think that's a problem. You hear of all of these criticisms about the Biden plan from people who those low propensity voters don't know about. They're not reading on Twitter every single day. So Trump needs to take on the issue if they want to make hay about it. And then maybe again, I think whatever it is, it's all about like a war of attrition here and bringing it to a draw.
Jonah, I also think it's interesting strategic question for Democrats because immigration is such a lopsided issue in terms of where voters are, who they think is better equipped to handle the issue of immigration. So that Joe Biden doing something, you try to blunt that. But if you talk a lot about it and most people aren't tuning in a ton, it's still an issue that you're losing on. And I don't even know that with this, it's going to somehow, like, even if everyone in America was forced to like Clockwork Orange style, sit with their eyes open and watch a 30-minute news program on what Joe Biden's done on the border, I don't know that it's going to change those underlying dynamics of who Americans think is, quote unquote, best equipped to handle the border. So you blunt some of the blood loss perhaps on immigration, but I don't know that this is an issue they're going to want to talk about a lot.
No, I think that's probably right. I mean, it's so my email box is full of all of these left-wing activist groups announcing press conferences and get-togethers and confabs and all sorts of other things where people will gather and say things about how terrible and evil and horrible and no good what Biden is doing is. I don't get the sense, maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't get the sense that the average Democrat cares that much, right? I think the average Democrat thinks, we've let in a lot of immigrants into this country in the last 10 years. And a lot of them illegally, and a lot of them don't get sent home, and some of them commit crimes. And I see pictures of that border where they have Pakistanis and Mauritanians and all these people coming in. And I kind of think, we should do something about that. And when they hear the sort of squad kind of adjacent people say, this is heartless and inhumane, but there's actually not kids in cages. There's not like people being picked off by snipers. There's not the stuff that, would actually arouse the moral conscience of people. It's really just people saying, the government saying, you're going to have to wait in line someplace else before you come in here. I just don't think a lot of Democrats who may sort of, their heart may be with the activist crowd, are going to vote on this in a significant way or get worked up about it. And I also just think that the median immigrant family, first generation, family, the median legal immigrant family, median Hispanic family is moving away from the sort of blue state left on these issues. And those sort of hardcore lefty activist types who want to make this a centerpiece issue and don't want to lose, I would argue in part this has to do with all sorts of very obscure urban funding mechanisms for all sorts of things. They need those people for cover. And so I just feel like this issue is slipping away from Democrats in general, and Biden has been really foolish for waiting so long for the tide to carry him out rather than like rowing a little bit ahead of the wave. And, nautical metaphors are my forte.
I think you're 100% right that he could have done this exact thing 2 years ago, and it might have made a political difference because of that sister soldier tension, let's call it. If you're a little bit ahead of the wave, like you said, Jonah, you get a little bit of credit for pushing back on the extremists within your own party. I'm not even sure he's with the median voter in his party right now. I think he might be just a little bit behind the median Democratic voter. So not only do you not get that political credit, I'm not even sure that people notice. And so this gets back to then that reason, Mike, the why now? Jonah's point about the debate. It's not just that it's an election year. It's that the debate is in 2 weeks and you need some answer to that question. And when you're sitting in debate prep and there's that question is just miserable and you're flim-flamming around like, oh, well, I'm president of the United States, so I can concoct my own answer to it. I wonder what other issues you think might fall into that category of things you can do something about in the next 2 weeks to have a better answer at the debate, which is at the end of June.
Not many issues. Again, it's why he's going here rather than the economy. Like he can't say the American people know I just did this last week that I unilaterally lowered the interest rate. I actually unilaterally lowered inflation. I've been waiting around for Congress to do it, but I have now used my power. Like he can't do it. That's ridiculous. He can't do anything like that.
He could revoke his pardon for those turkeys.
Hey, now we're talking. Now we're talking. Biden's second administration. Here we come.
F those turkeys. Whose names are something like freedom and independence.
Right. And then the Republicans will say Biden was killing freedom and independence.
They were here illegally from Canada.
I think this is, when you were just talking, Sarah, I was like I was projecting what I expect Biden to say when the immigration question comes up. And Biden has been in public life for 50 plus years. So like, it's very easy to figure out like how, so it will start with Congress. Like he'll explain how, there was a bipartisan group of senators who came together to actually get this done permanently. And he'll sort of do this kind of long like explanation about how it all fell apart because a Republican senator from the state of Oklahoma, a very red state, tried to do this. And then, the extremists in the MAGA wing of the House Republican Conference stopped him from doing it, painting himself as coming in as the hero. Like this is actually a very good space for him, I think, from a debate perspective. Like he's able to say, he sort of knows how Congress works or doesn't work, and he'll be able to kind of portray himself as the smartest guy, the guy who was able to come up with the solution when all the petty folks in Congress couldn't do it. Like it's all engineered, this executive order, all of this for that moment. And it will be probably a pretty good moment if he can get the words out and remember James Langford's name. So
I think it'll be interesting if, as I suspect, a court enjoins this between now and the debate. I mean, just listeners, and especially you AO listeners who are, double dispatch podcasters, just watch my head roll off my shoulders when he blames the courts at the debate. I will lose it. We will have an emergency podcast and it'll just be me in a scream, just a continuous scream for 7 minutes. And that'll be the whole podcast.
Screaming like Justice Alito's neighbor.
I'll learn that breathing technique, where you can like breathe in while putting out sound, just to continue the scream. All right. Speaking of woes for Joe Biden, Jonah, there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal this week. And, I felt like maybe I was more attuned to it when I was on the calm side of this equation. But, during the Trump administration, it felt like once a week, maybe once every other week, there was one news story that was sort of the thing everyone had to talk about and digest. And that pace has, I felt, slowed down quite a bit lately. But this Wall Street Journal story is that. It's the news story everyone had to read. Everyone had to have thoughts on the substance, but also the process. But also now let's talk about whether it was a overall fair piece. Did they include all the right quotes? Can you walk us through this?
Sure. It was such a must-read piece for Washington that even I read it. So it was, my lips are tired. I even wrote about it in the Wednesday G-File.
That's what she said.
So I wrote my Wednesday G-File about it, or at least in part. The piece is about, I think the headline is something along the lines, aides say that Biden is slipping, or maybe that's the subhead, right? That his age is showing, and that he has good moments and bad moments. And I think that they open themselves up to some legitimate criticism by basically only quoting on the record Republicans who have a deep-seated partisan interest in saying these things. And some of these Republicans have said the opposite, including Kevin McCarthy, in the past about the impression they got of Joe Biden in private meetings. So it's a little suspect. At the same time, of course, Joe Biden's is slipping a little bit, right? I mean, I think Senator Risch from, was it South Dakota? Idaho. He had it right. He said the Joe Biden you see on TV is the Joe Biden you get. And I think that the almost panic-stricken outrage from sort of the MSNBC crowd about how this was journalistic malpractice and this was outrageous, and Joe Scarborough is all in on defending Biden on this stuff, just shows you, as to a certain extent, the vulnerability they know is there. And at the same time, it's sort of like we were talking earlier about how if the courts throw out the Biden plan for immigration, that proves that the Republicans were wrong, all the time, saying Biden could do all these things easily. The article actually confirms the fact that he's just an old dude who has bad moments. It doesn't confirm the fact that he's senile, that he's a drooling, basket case, or any of these kinds of things. And that's the response. That's the bar that Trump and much of the GOP and a lot of the right-wing punditocracy has set for Biden. Is they talk about him as if he's completely lost in senility, doesn't realize that today is not lime jello day at the home, and that is completely at sea. And that's not the Joe Biden you see on TV either. And so it creates, it was such an interesting Rorschach test, much like the Time interview with Biden, where the people who want to say he might as well be on a ventilator, he's so brain dead, and the people who say he is the Galileo of our time, he's so versatile and dynamic, they both look like idiots if you can just take off the partisan blinders for a second and just realize what you see on TV is what you get.
Mike, some of the controversy around this story is exactly what Jonah said. It actually didn't really fit the narrative of either side, but you had Republicans, sort of holding this up as like, aha, see, he's drooling, in the hopes that maybe you hadn't read the story. And then you had Democrats pushing back really with quite a muddled message, I thought. Because on the one hand, you have some, what I think are pretty smart Democrats saying, actually, this is pretty much right. And it doesn't say what you think it says. And then you had others sort of freaking out that the Wall Street Journal didn't include their quotes that the White House had asked them to give. Because this reporter, of course, calls around a bunch of Democrats, either sort of don't respond or they give kind of like whatever mealy statements. Those Democratic congressmen call the White House to tell them someone's calling around with these questions. The White House gives them a statement or a suggested statement or suggests that they call back. So then they call back and say, hey, the White House asked me to call you back. And the Wall Street Journal didn't include all of those statements. Joe Biden, can jump over tall buildings and rescue kittens from trees by climbing them all. What do you think of the Wall Street Journal's decision-making here and how you approach a story like this to get it right, but also not have a 6,000-word piece with a whole bunch of quotes that aren't helpful?
Yeah, if there are any flacks listening to this, working for a member of Congress or a campaign, and there's some kind of, you get the sense that there's some negative story coming out about your principal, my recommendation is don't have a bunch of allies send a bunch of boilerplate, unusable, happy talk statements and push it hard. I mean, it's not the work is not hard to see for wrestling fans. Like, you can see all of the maneuvering when you're a reporter of people trying to put on a happy face. It actually ends up telling you that your instincts and your sources are correct when, it's all the lady doth protest too much. And that's not just what seems to have been going on before the story was published, but absolutely after the story was published. This is such a Streisand effect moment. Yes, people were talking about this story, but the story had legs beyond the day that it was published, in large part because the White House and their allies were screaming their heads off about how unfair the story was. If you're explaining or you're complaining, you're losing, particularly in this case, because as Jim Risch said, it's what we see, what we're being told is going on behind closed doors is what we see in front of the cameras. I agree with you, Jonah, that this is not the damning portrait of Biden that most Republicans would like us to see. He comes across as the kind of arrogant, know-it-all foreign policy dove that he's been for 50 years. He's in a way, he's the same as he's always been. Maybe just like a little slower because he's in his 80s, and we all know people like that.
Also, how do Republicans keep doing this, keep lowering expectations? Again, to mention the debate, we're 2 weeks out, and they're like, see, he can't string together a sentence. Just, again, from a pure strategic standpoint, quit saying that. If anything, you guys should have been freaking out about the Wall Street Journal story and saying, look, the mainstream media is trying to lower expectations for Joe Biden ahead of the debate. And instead, they're like, oh my God, it wasn't bad enough. What? No. They're like, oh, they just didn't get the quotes about him, falling over. Ugh.
Right. Which, of course, that's not happening. He's not drooling.
I hate watching people be bad at their jobs. That's my main complaint. I'm not rooting for the Republicans here, but it bothers me that they're not better at this.
Sarah, who picked up on this was Donald Trump himself. He didn't tweet. He posted on Truth Social basically that the age issue was not the problem for Biden, which I thought was brilliant. A little bit of, CYA on behalf of the almost octogenarian Republican nominee.
I mean, there is this weird, bizarre thing where Democrats did get themselves. I mean, I agree with you entirely on the messaging. The Republicans have screwed up this messaging more than Democrats have. But people really don't like to be gaslit. And the Democratic argument, or the progressive argument, the pro-Biden argument, is that he's really dynamic and sharp and engaging and in command of things in private. But he chooses to keep that aspect of his personality secret from the public.
It's the Ronald Reagan Saturday Night Live skit.
Exactly.
It's amazing that someone watched that and was like, yeah, but what if that were real life instead of a joke?
This is the part of the job I hate.
We should put a link to the SNL thing in the show notes for people who don't know it, because it's
but there's this portrayal of Biden he's doing multiple Sudoku puzzles while doing parkour, all just inside the White House where nobody can see. And if only Gregory Meeks could be quoted saying as much by the Wall Street Journal, then all of Biden's age issues would go away.
Or it's like the Grand Meister in Game of Thrones in the Capitol, who like has to pretend he's feeble and old and hunched. Yeah, it just occurred to me there's another pop culture reference that's like not, at least from this century.
How dare you, sir? All right, I guess this episode is a bit of like, Biden 2 minutes of hate, but it's
Biden heavy, but that's okay. We don't do enough Biden stuff, and he is the president of the United States.
All right. So another thing that has not gone particularly well for Joe Biden this week is that his son is on trial for 3 felony counts related to possessing a gun while being a user of a controlled substance. We've talked certainly about the legal aspects of that on advisory opinions, but similar to the Trump issue, I think that the prudential aspects, the political aspects, frankly, are more important to the future of the country and people's sort of trust in the rule of law than any of the legal aspects. And this is the idea that if he weren't Hunter Biden, he wouldn't be on trial right now. And how we deal with that. Mike, I'm curious just from a reporting standpoint, if you think that the 2 cases are being treated differently by reporters at all before we get to sort of the White House and the pundit class.
You mean the 2 cases, the hush money case for Trump and the Hunter Biden?
Yeah, as opposed, by the way, I want to clarify, I mean the hush money case in Manhattan that Donald Trump was just convicted in, not, for instance, the classified documents case. That's not an example where Donald Trump wouldn't have faced trial but for being Donald Trump. No. In fact, if anything, quite the opposite. He was given so many opportunities.
So much leeway.
Yeah, that's the opposite of
Absolutely.
a crab trap. But with sorry, Jonah just looked up on that one. Crabs?
I was going to tell you my John Lindsay, Florence Henderson story, but we'll save that for another time.
I know that story, Jonah. Do not tell that. Even though Steve's not here, do not tell that one. To reorient this podcast, back to your question, Sarah. I mean, from a strictly media coverage standpoint, yes, CNN is also sending correspondents to stand outside the courthouse in Delaware for the Hunter Biden trial, as it was, outside the Manhattan courthouse for the Trump trial. There are live blogs at the Washington Post and the New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say the coverage is less sensational for Hunter Biden's trial. There's kind of a lot less. I guess I can't say it's a lot less salacious because we are talking about witness testimony from ex-girlfriends, one of whom was the widow of Hunter's brother. There are text messages. We're talking about drug use and money being spent. So it's pretty salacious. But I mean, the coverage of it is, it does feel a little bit more in sorrow than in anger from the media. And I don't know if that's unwarranted, but I would say it's got less exciting coverage. There's no wall-to-wall stuff like it is with the former president.
Jonah, then I feel like I've seen a lot of talk from the right that this is lawfare against Donald Trump and this is the end of the republic as we start prosecuting our political enemies. And I think on the left, I've heard plenty of, this was political targeting, to embarrass Joe Biden and his family. And embarrass someone who has a substance abuse problem, and that these charges would not have been brought. They're very unusual charges, but for him being the president's son. And I guess I'm confused why nobody is saying both.
Yeah, I mean, so Warren and I yesterday on The Remnant, we kind of got into this a little bit as well.
Yes.
I think you're right. And, and this is a point you've made a lot on AO from the beginning, which is that everyone's a little right, depending on how you look at this. Insofar as, look, we can all at least credit the argument, the degree to which we all agree with it or not, we can discuss another time, that the Bragg case should never have been brought. But once brought, Trump was treated better than any normal criminal defendant. He was given more allowances. He was cut more slack. I am fairly confident that an accountant who was up on charges of false bookkeeping and furtherance of another crime who kept screaming that the judge was a liar and rigged and corrupt would have been treated more harshly than Donald Trump was, right? Meanwhile, so like, yeah, the case shouldn't have been brought. You can make that argument. And so like, as I was saying to Mike yesterday, there's some polling that shows that like a large majority of Americans think that the Bragg case was politically motivated and correctly founded, right? So that like it was that he's guilty and he should have been found guilty and it was politically motivated. And that's not a contradiction that people think it is, right? Similarly with the Hunter thing, I mean, Sarah, you know this better than I do, but how many people are prosecuted every year for lying on their gun forms about being drug addicts?
Basically none without some, what's the opposite of extenuating circumstance? Worsening?
Compounding.
Yeah. So if the gun was used in a crime, if there's lots of guns, but yeah, not by itself. And here you have the 2 felony for lying and the 1 possession of a gun while being a user of a controlled substance. But they've also got him dead to rights on the facts. So it's a similar thing. Like, you wouldn't be charged with it, but once you are charged with it, that's another reason that they don't tend to charge people, is because it's really hard to prove on the facts, because most people don't write memoirs.
Yeah.
Don't keep diaries that say, while I did this, I was an addict. I was a user of a controlled substance. But, this gets to a larger issue when it comes to gun control as a topic in this country. We can't come close to prosecuting all the gun crimes that we currently have in the country. And I get so frustrated when people want to pass more gun control laws, because some of them I agree with, that I think, fine, they're good policy, but we don't have the resources to actually get the illegal guns off the street now. This felon in possession of a gun while being a user of a controlled substance carries a sentencing guideline range of 10 to 16 months. I think that should feel like a lot of time to people to spend in prison. And yet, when you talk to federal prosecutors, they'll sort of tell you like, yeah, I mean, that's sort of on the margin / below what we would generally bring, because we're looking at, in terms of where to put our resources, we've got enough cases that carry more prison time than that related to guns. And so we focus on those.
Yeah, my other point is that there's another reason why they're bringing the gun cases, is that politically you had that plea deal thing blow up in court. And there was a lot of pressure to say, we're going to look into these other much bigger, much more serious in terms of public policy kind of considerations, crimes about influence peddling and what his dad was connected to the Biden crime family and all these kinds of things. And it looked like the fix was in. And when it blew up, the DOJ was left in this position of saying, well, we can't just like not prosecute him now for anything. So let's prosecute him for the thing that we have him dead to right on the facts. And I just think that like, this is the price we pay for democracy, is that we're going to have difficult cases for people who are in the public eye and their relatives when they turn out to be scumbag type people. It's going to be very difficult to have hard and fast, one rule fits for everybody kind of approach to this stuff. And at least in the case of Trump, it's worth pointing out, he doesn't believe in one rule for everybody. He wants exemptions from all the rules. He's just pissed that he's not getting as many as he wants. Can I hijack this for just 2 seconds? I have the thing that I want to ask you guys about. It's weird. I don't want to sound like this is my in defense of drug addicts segment, but blaming all of Hunter Biden's behavior on addiction bothers me a little bit. I've known drug addicts. My brother died in large part from his addictions. It's a complicated story. While it's absolutely true, there are people who are mean drunks, right? That for whatever reason, they start drinking and they just become different people and nasty people. A lot of people don't do that. And there's a lot of things that Hunter clearly did that he's blaming entirely on his addiction, or wants people to draw that conclusion, when it turns out, like, just because you're smoking crack doesn't mean you have to sleep with your dead brother's widow. I mean, it seems to me like...
Or say really mean, hurtful, horrible things about your stepmother who has raised you since you were a child.
Yeah. I mean, I can go down a long list of things, right? And so like, and how much, I'm not a big fan of blaming parents for bad seeds and all that kind of stuff, but life's complicated, life's weird. But if every crack addict in America went and tried to sell influence with the vice president to Kazaki businessmen, there'd be a lot more Americans in Kazakhstan, right? I mean, we can make some distinctions here, and this desire to sort of sweep it all underneath the rubric. There's something about it that bothers me, and I didn't know where else I was going to get a chance to say it. So there you go. Am I crazy?
No.
Mike, I also would like to take a detour to talk about the terms both-sidesism and whataboutism.
Oh, I wanted to talk to you about this. Okay, yeah.
Here we go.
Because
here we go.
I feel like I was accused of both-sidesism by comparing the Trump case and the Hunter Biden case. And I don't think that's what both-sidesism means. I think that's when you're saying, I'm going to excuse the bad behavior of my side by pointing out that the other side does it. But then someone was like, yeah, I think that's whataboutism, not both-sidesism. And actually, I think they're right. And I don't really know the difference now between the two words, maybe. So, Mike, can you help me here with why am I bad?
I don't know if we have enough time in this podcast. We got to wrap this up eventually, Sarah. Come on. Okay, so let me start with whataboutism. Whataboutism is the sort of phenomenon in political discourse, generally online, but also in cable news and other venues and media, where you're presented with something damaging or embarrassing about your side, about somebody on your team. And your response to the question of how can you defend this, or what is the defense for this, is to redirect it to the other side.
Okay,
right?
so an example of this is Donald Trump's a convicted felon. And then I would say, yeah, but look at Joe Biden crime family.
Yeah. Or Hillary Clinton's emails.
Okay. So that's whataboutism. Literally saying, like, what about this other thing on the other side? Okay.
It's deflection.
Exactly.
Okay.
Both-sidesism, I think, and this is how I formulate both-sidesism. It is an argument or a rhetorical approach by which you sort of throw up your hands about a particular issue, say, I don't know, insider trading by members of Congress, by saying, look, everybody does it, and so therefore we can't do anything about it. That both sides are guilty of devaluing our political discourse because one side says you're a racist and the other side says you're a communist, and sort of placing no value on which one is worse, throwing up
the like false
both
equivalency. So like there's January 6th on the one hand and Jabal Bowman pulling the fire extinguisher on the other. They both disrupted democracy.
Exactly. Exactly. They both caused a security incident at the Capitol. But like I do think both-sidesism is used as a cudgel, or as a way to, in a way, like criticize anybody for saying there's a global problem or there's a cultural problem. That I think both-sidesism as an argument is a way to score a partisan point. To say, well, you're just engaging in both-sidesism is a way to say, yeah, because the people I hate are the worse, are worse at it than the people
it's almost like reverse whataboutism. Like,
exactly,
yeah, my side did something wrong, but by comparing it even to the other side, you're a moron because the other side is so much worse.
Yeah,
so
where you're acting in bad faith.
Yeah,
so something like that.
Yeah. So the reason I'm glad you brought this up is just because I have been calling myself sincerely a both-sideser for a while now. Insofar as,
what about when you didn't call yourself both sides?
Insofar as I think a lot of our problems in our politics are American problems, and they just manifest themselves somewhat differently as Democrat or Republican or right wing or left wing problems. And you caused me, when you asked the question, a bit of existential panic, because I was like, oh crap, have I been using it wrong and admitting to something that I'm not actually doing? And I started to overthink it and sweat it. And so I just want to be clear that, like, whatever people mean by both sides are, what I mean when I describe myself as one is saying both parties are screwed up They're screwed up in ways that in some ways are unique to them, but really it's the way the problems the common problems of our politics and our culture manifest themselves. That's the difference. There's asymmetry, but like we have a right-wing cancel culture and we have a left-wing cancel culture. I don't like either. And so when I say I'm a both sideser, what I'm getting at is I don't like illiberalism in either party. And I see more and more of it on both sides. So,
and it doesn't really matter which example today is worse than the other example today, because big picture, philosophically, both sides are pursuing illiberalism when it comes to speech.
All sorts of things. Industrial policy, go down a long list of things.
Industrial policy.
I'm serious. Industrial policy is illiberal, but hey, we can argue.
I feel like this is Jonah like hearing some word from the kids' lingo and then having no clue how to use it in a sentence. Like, I'm sus. I thought you meant sustainable. Like,
which word do I not understand? The both sides thing, or okay, that's what I was afraid of. I was like, holy crap, am I been using this wrong?
So, okay, in the spirit then of not doing both sidesism, I guess. Do you think that one of these? Do you think it's a false equivalency to compare the Trump Manhattan prosecution to the Hunter Biden prosecution? Because I can actually argue either one is a false equivalency. On the one hand, Donald Trump was president of the United States, so yeah, maybe he deserves more scrutiny. On the other hand, Hunter Biden's is a clear-cut law with clear facts applying to that law. So when you stumble upon that, when you're investigating him for something else, you end up in a bit of a pickle if you don't bring charges because it's so dead to rights. I guess, so there's that issue. I'm also concerned about something y'all raised, which is, I think it was you, Mike, who said, this is what's going to happen to people and their families when they run for office from now on. You're going to get investigated, so you better be squeaky clean. What good person, what morally upstanding father, husband, etc., is going to be willing to put their family through this? And it feels a little like the incentives in Congress these days. The good people aren't going to want to run for Congress because if you want to legislate, that's not the place to do it. Instead, it's going to attract the bad people who really always wanted to be cable news pundits and just couldn't quite cut it unless they had the title congressman. I mean, the people who are going to run for office in this new era, I'm worried aren't going to be the good ones.
Which is why the threat of indictment and conviction should be raised, not lowered. If we're going to have a poor class of public official, they should be frightened. I mean, I'm stealing this from Jonah, as we discussed on the Remnant, and as he has discussed many times. Right, the sort of the way in which the Roman, public. I don't know what you describe it. The sort of the public official trials that happened in the Roman Republic were sort of maybe a great way of keeping their those who were in public office accountable and not skimming things off the top out in the out in Gaul or wherever they were. And that's of course why the Roman Republic remains to this day in our current world. I mean, I do worry about this, right? Like, even if we start, a sort of lawfare to keep our public officials in check, that actually just devolves into something ugly that, that Sarah, you described being worried about, and brings about, the decline of America and the Constitution.
Because it's not just you, it's your kids. Like, you better hope your kids never
it's your
did
kids,
anything wrong.
It's fair. But Hunter is an adult. I mean, he's not a child.
Yeah, I mean, let's slice the onion here a little, or the issue here a little closer, right? I mean, Hunter and Joe Biden's brother
inserted themselves in,
have been trading on his political positions as a business model.
Yep.
And so, like, there is a little bit of F around and find out about it, insofar as if Hunter were an accountant, or not an accountant, a plumber in Cleveland, and he was getting dragged through this stuff to punish Biden, that would arouse more outrage in me than like what he's been trying to monetize and how he's been trying to monetize, and his brother. I mean, like, I think Kinsley's the guy who first said, the real scandal isn't what's illegal, it's what's legal. We can concede for the sake of argument that Comer could not find a smoking gun that proved that the Biden crime family was in fact a crime family. What they did for a living and how they did it for big chunks of this was gross.
Sus.
I mean, was super sus, and I don't mean sustainable, young lady. Anyway, so like once you're in the game, you're in the game to a certain extent, and so like that's part of the calculation as well.
I think that's fair. All right, with remaining few minutes, we have our last topic, which is this ceasefire proposal. Again, Joe Biden coming out publicly and sort of bullet pointing the ceasefire proposal that Israel has agreed to. Then there was all this like, no, Netanyahu didn't agree to that. Well, yes, he did, because various Israeli senior officials had confirmed it. Are we any closer to a ceasefire? And maybe more importantly, are we any closer to getting the hostages back?
No. And no.
And why did Biden get out there? Like, was it to try to pin down the two sides? Was it to try to make it, appease his left base that, see, look, I got a ceasefire proposal that then fell apart in his hands?
I mean, I do think a big part of this was a way to kind of pin down both sides and try to sort of, get them to come out with, and sort of call their bluff a little, each side's bluff.
I'll say that I was pretty outraged by it. It was like step one, complete and total ceasefire, return of some of the hostages, yada, 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 ... Some other hostages get returned, then more yada, yada, ... The remains of hostages that they've been keeping. I mean, they've been keeping the bodies hostage at this point.
Which does matter to Israelis, right? I mean, like
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that they should have been returning those now. But the idea that you can have a complete and total ceasefire while they still get to hold more hostages, that's a non-starter.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree. And it does make me wonder, I mean, is there a political element to this, as you suggested? Is it?
How could the Biden administration even get behind such a proposal to agree to a total ceasefire without the return of all the hostages all in one step? Ceasefire, yes. Hostages, yes. I'm not even saying that I think that's a good idea, but it certainly is the minimum that you would agree to.
Yeah, well, and again, what I'm wondering is this similar to the immigration the immigration executive order here, which is you've got to demonstrate that you're doing something. But the difference here, of course, is that you need to demonstrate to your far left flank within your party. I'm skeptical that this is going to achieve any sort of cooling of tensions on that left flank that even will really matter for his political. I think he's sort of bought into the BS that this is going to be critical for his reelection, is to make sure the far left of his party is on board. I just, where are they going to go other than maybe stay home? So it just looks incompetent. But also we can't forget that this is kind of who Joe Biden is on foreign policy. He is always sort of looking for the way out of conflict, no matter the cost. And I think you can look at Afghanistan as a great example of that. I see this as on that same continuum. It's not great.
Jonah.
Yeah, no, look, I think you were asking earlier about other things he could do within 2 weeks of the debate to have a political talking point. And I'm with Mike on this. It's very difficult for me to see where this comes from other than a desire to be able to assert things that will not last, that give people the false impression of what the political reality is, right? I mean, because it's hard to follow for people who follow it for a living. And for like a lot of normal Americans, they're just going to hear Joe Biden is talking tough to the Israelis and talking tough to Hamas about a ceasefire and ending the war. And I think that this sort of tendency of this administration to have talking points guide policy is really kind of remarkable. And the example I wrote about yesterday was the Gaza pier. They clearly came up with or agreed to do because he needed to say something at the State of the Union address. He was like, we're going to have to make a pier and we're going to bring aid and we don't need to rely on the Israelis or the Egyptians and we're going to feed the hungry. And that all sounds great, except for the fact it was an incredibly stupid idea. And it was supposed to deliver 500 metric tons a day of aid. After the first 1,000 metric tons, so 2 days worth, they had to shut it down. And those first 1,000 tons were stolen. And now the whole pier has had to be towed off back to Israel to be fixed. But it served its purpose at the time of providing a talking point. We're doing something. And it feels to me like that's the best case scenario for explaining where this sort of, we're just, like Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy, we're going to kind of declare the end of the war and then like just hold them accountable to it. The only complicating thing I would say is that Israel kind of does need to figure out a way to put the Hamas stuff on the back burner a little bit, because it does sound like they're revving up to go after Hezbollah in the north. And that's a much more difficult enemy. And so there is an incentive on the Israeli side to have this sort of breathing space kind of thing. And how they're gaming this out is a bit of a mystery to me. I agree with Michael, like Biden's been bad at this foreign policy stuff for his entire political career. And that's what comes, and I think this is the point of the G-file, was that his vacillating, his meandering, his unsteadiness, people attribute to his age, when in fact that's him, right? And that's the mess he's gotten himself into, is like the way to reassure people he's not too old for the job is to actually stand firm on some policy stuff. Like he's not going to be able to like run up the steps like Rocky, and dance around Philly, but he can plant a flag and stand by it. And that would reassure a lot more people about him being up to the job than the physical stuff.
All right. We actually need to reserve the remainder of our time for a very important, not worth your time, because it is worth our time, the topic. But the question is it worth your time to return grocery store carts after you've loaded your groceries into the car? Mike, you flagged this for us. And I find it really fascinating because on the one hand, there's like the sort of frivolous, like, lol, people not returning grocery carts are the worst in the world. But as a parent, I think we've all sort of experienced like, okay, so you've got the kid in the cart and the groceries in the cart. You get them to the car. It's like a hot summer day, let's say. Now you've loaded the groceries in the back. You've got the kid in the car seat. What do you do? Because your choices are like, what? Leave the doors open and go return the cart. Close the doors, lock the kid in, return the cart. Like sometimes it is far away. I will admit that I don't think I'm very consistent on this, because if it's too far away, I'm just not going to leave my kid alone in the car. And frankly, in the story that you flagged, which was from the New York Post, this mom of 3, I think it doesn't even make sense to me. She was poo-pooing this lady who doesn't return her grocery carts, who is a mom of 2. And she's like, I have 3 kids. They're 5, 3, and 9 months old. And I take the cart to the car, unload the groceries, and then with the kids, I return the cart. And then I take the kids back to the car and load them in. I do not believe you. No, ma'am. That is false.
Okay, so as a blanket statement, I believe that people who do not return their carts to the cart corral, are they in the lowest circle of hell at the end? Who can say? Really?
But wait. Does it matter? Because there's different, like there's leaving it in the middle of the road or in the parking spot next to you. I don't do that. That is a selfish a-hole thing to do.
So what do you do with it, Sarah?
Okay. Well, in my grocery store, there's like a median between the cars that would face each other. And so I put the cart in the median between those 2 cars if I cannot return it.
Sorry, I'm just processing all of this.
And again, I don't mean I do this every time.
You think you know somebody. You think you know a person.
If I'm with Scott, one of us returns the cart while the other one's buckling in the kid. The question is, when you are parenting alone, and maybe this is a gender thing, like as a woman, like, I don't know. I am more leery, I think, in parking lots than probably a man is. Like, I'm looking around a lot more than men probably are.
I will concede that. I will also say that, so you return the cart when you're with your husband. Big deal. It's when it's difficult. It's when it's when it's hard that character is really truly revealed.
Kidnapping of your child. How dare you, madam, not return that cart?
So, look, I've been in the situation of big kids with the cart and little kids, babies with the cart.
You've got 3.
I have I've got 3. They're all kind of spread out in ages. And so,
can you make the big one return the cart now?
Oh yeah, that's no problem. Please, will he push it all the way in so that it nests perfectly in? No, but we're working on it. But I have no problem, for instance, putting the kids in the car seat, even closing the door, locking it, and running the cart back to the corral. That does not bother me one bit. I'm not.
It's a hot day.
So what? They'll be in there for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. That's nothing. That's nothing. That's character building. I've done this though. Also with the infants or the toddlers.
Go ahead. Your head or a car hits you, and now your kids are locked in the car, and maybe it'll take people a few minutes to realize that there's kids in your car while you're unconscious.
I mean, okay, what if aliens came down and abducted me?
No,
Jonah, as I'm walking back.
I think it's a reasonable fear that like something could happen.
But it depends on the age. So, point of fact, my sister-in-law, Carrie, Jessica's little sister, in the Safeway parking lot in Sagamore, near where we live, very hot summer day, when her oldest daughter was a baby. She was loading the baby in, and the baby likes to play with the car keys. She turns around to look at the cart, and the weight of the door closes halfway. Just like the latch just closes and locks enough. Yep. Raina's playing with the car keys and hits lock. And then Carrie screams, and Raina screams and drops the car keys, but she's already in the car seat. And so the car is now heating up at about 5 degrees every 3 seconds. And it's just getting hot. And Carrie's trying to do the door, and she can't get the door, but even by jiggling it, she locks it more. And so now it's shut, and she's freaking out. And she had this nice BMW SUV, and she starts screaming, "Someone help me, someone help me." Someone comes out of the CVS with a hammer and swings to smash the glass, and the hammer just bounces off this super secure glass, and they can't get into the car. And now Raina is sweating, and Carrie is about to have a nervous break, and she's calling people, and she can't get anyone on the phone, and blah, blah, blah. Finally, a full fire engine comes, and they have some tool that just breaks the glass, and they get her out, and everyone's
never return the cart, Mike.
But so like,
I was saying, that was my question. Did she return the car?
And this moment, you're like, you know how like you've both probably like some way experienced the kid missing in the department store feeling, and every 30 seconds feels like 3,000 years, and it's geometric, right? Those were like the longest 12 minutes of Carrie's life, is like watching her kid like sweat in real time in this thing, trapped in the car. So I think about that. I'm very sympathetic, because that has plagued my imagination for like 15, almost 20 years now. And so, but it's been a long time. I would be very cautious about leaving kid who doesn't know how to open car door or anything like that in a car. On the other hand, I cannot tell you how little I care about this issue. I agree with you entirely that you should try to return the cart. Different supermarkets, different parking lots have sort of they're different. There's a different landscape for this question. Like I go to this Wegmans now where you see like 8 carts piled up in one spot. It's not an official spot for the carts, but like the dudes who collect the carts know that's one of the places you go, and so you get it, right? And I will admit, I'm juvenile. One of the things I like most about returning the cart is pushing it as hard as I can from as far away as I can as possible to see if I can get it through into the exhaust port of the Death Star. I make it a game.
Man, Man brain.
Yeah.
That is man brain.
And I like the crashing sound it makes. And sometimes I'll turn my back and walk away like it's an explosion and not look back to see the carnage I've left. I mean, I live in a fun life.
Exactly. I'm with you on that. You know, if we can make this chore fun, then we can save America. Look, I take your points about this. I mean, literally last week, I get a call from my wife. I'm sitting at my desk at Dispatch World headquarters, and she calls to say,
she locked the kid in the car again?
In our driveway. First time, in our driveway, the van is locked because the toddler has the car keys and has locked it. And can you please come home and open the car? So I get that. It was not a hot day, but I can understand the freak out and the frustration about that. With toddlers and babies, by the way, I've just done this: unload the groceries, take the cart back with the toddler in the little seat.
That's psychotic.
Wait, hold on. And then you put the kid, you take the kid out, put the cart in the thing, and then carry the baby back to the car. It's easy. What's wrong with that?
With two.
Huh? With two kids? Well, okay. So maybe this is showing my situation. I've never had two toddlers at the same time.
Yeah. You're not carrying two kids back. Sorry.
You know who we need to have on this podcast to settle this question? Mrs. Kevin Williamson.
Exactly. With 4 children.
She gets a dispensation. I hereby clear her of all
3
current and future
and a toddler likes to run around in parking lots.
Yeah, Mike. Now who's the a-hole?
Never said I wasn't.
I really would pay infinite, to be able to switch brains, to just like put my brain in the like marinating in the juices of a man brain for 1 hour to know what it is like to live inside y'all's situation. Because I
most fun hour of your life.
I think it is so weird. It's like I can see through the looking glass darkly in these moments of what it's like. I mean, the peeing standing up alone and just the knowledge that you walk around knowing that at any moment you can pee anywhere you want. I think that itself must give you a certain swagger that women can experience. On the flip side, to put your brain into like my skull, I think would stun a team of oxen. I think y'all would be so paralyzed and so incapable of functioning for a hot moment with these sort of multitasking that female brains do, the concerns that we have across the board at any given moment. I mean, I'm thinking about the grocery cart, death situation while at the same time pools, right? I cannot abide the safety issue of pools. So like, it's important that as soon as humanly possible, like before they can walk, that your kid can swim, and not with floaties, right? Because if they have floaties, that gives them a false sense of being able to swim. No, they must be able to swim. So like, it's constant, like looking around the parking lot, imagining the worst case scenarios. Also, did I get the butter? Like, it's a whole world that you can't possibly imagine, Mike.
2 words, Sarah. Calm down.
And with that, I can't wait for the comment section, which will be nothing about Joe Biden or Israeli ceasefires and only be people screaming at each other about grocery carts. In the end, Jonah, I think you're right that the topography of the grocery store situation makes a lot of difference. There's grocery stores where you have to go all the way back to the front. There's ones that have it in the parking lot. There's ones where there's someone walking around sort of collecting carts. It's all different. And so to say that there's a one size fits all, Mike's just an a-hole.
Yeah, well, that's stipulated. At some point you should get my wife started because, she grew up in the supermarket business. She worked in supermarkets, owned grocery stores and stuff. Get her started on people who eat like the produce in the store, taking free samples of stuff. It's really kind of wild.
So that's also interesting as a parent if your kid really wants something and you're in the checkout line and they're like bugging you for it, do you let them start eating it in the checkout line, or do you enforce the like, no, we must pay for it first?
I think as long as you plan on paying for it, it's fine. Yeah. I'm talking about the people who like park in front of like the cherries and eat them and like, I'm just testing them, that kind of thing.
Is there a limit on grapes? That seems like a grape is the one potential exception to that rule.
The stuff that you want to steal is the exception to the rule. That would be my wife's response.
For treats, sometimes we let my son go get a cookie from the bakery section. And, like we've always remembered, because we keep the little paper, that you pull the cookie out of the bakery thing from. And that's the reminder to pay for the cookie. But there's not like a barcode or anything. Anyway, there is one time that I have forgotten to pay for the cookie. And to this moment, obviously, I feel guilty about that $1.25 that I owe Giant.
Yeah, I'll often drink a beverage in the store and then just charge the empty bottle. I mean, that kind of thing I don't think matters in this life. You
and my dad do that, and I think that's barbaric.
You guys live lives of chaos. That's all I can say. When it comes to grocery store, I'm here. This has been an unsettling conversation.
With that, we'll talk to you guys next week.